very important subject matter we're dealing with. Get a lot of emails from people wondering what to do, what's the process. Um, the playing field has to be, basically laid out for there be any relief. If there was no relief, then you'd just be a robot in there with no elective choice between either God or the secular world run by Satan. So, which side are you on? Which citizenship? Which charter are you in? Are you under Christ, under the biblical charter, or are you under all these secular charters, such as the Canadian Charter? Well, when we go to Scripture, the important word here is fraud, and it occurs in a couple places in the Bible, but the main one that we're going to read is in the book of James. So I'm going to go to the book of James, chapter 5. We've read out of this in previous videos, so this should be, at least coming back to memory for a lot that have been on the video watch that we've been uploading. But James chapter 5, and we're going to read verses 1 to 4. Now remember, James is writing at a time that he was surrounded by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire operates under the guise of fiction, and therefore Peter and James both were writing at the same era and time, and therefore we're giving clues, very, very serious clues, in fact just facts that you should be aware of. So in James chapter 5, 1 to 4, he says, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl, for your misery shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." Now we have to look at this very closely. When words are put down in Scripture, they're there to educate you, and you need to look into it. So what was he talking about when he said they reaped, the rich have these hired laborers reap down their fields? Well, people think it was a farm field. Yes, it could have symbolically be both a farm field and something else. When we talk about what is an occupation, usually it's a job, usually it's a title, and that's what birth, B-E-R-T-H, really represents. So in the world of legal, it would have been better for them to put statement of B-E-R-T-H record, because that's really what they're talking about. Because birth in that sense is a job. Therefore, it's an occupation, not in the sense of an actual physical birth that would go on in reality. Remember, the legal world is in fiction. Okay, but it likes to kind of induce into the belief that it's in reality. So you got to be very careful what you're researching and how you're researching, because you got to go to the facts. Don't get caught up in the fiction. So when he said that they would reap down their fields, well, those are occupations, what they get involved in. Uniquely, the birth certificate in the world of secular is actually at times referred to as a tombstone advertisement. Of course, referencing the dead. And that's what everything you do with it, even getting borrowed money from a bank to go and try to buy a home and borrow against with that title you're doing. It's called a mortgage, which is dead pledge, because the last name is the dead. It's the body corporate. It is, dead body speaking oration, corpse oration, corporation. Very simple, not hard to understand. So when we go next, we're going to go to the understanding of the fraud. When we look at the word even fiction, which was spoken of in Samuel Johnson's dictionary, 1755, which we're going to read out of briefly, it'll give you an understanding of the connection of these words like fraud, lie, fiction. They all relate to each other. So Samuel Johnson's dictionary, 1755, defines fiction as the act of feigning or inventing, Peter talked about that, In the book of Peter, he says they will make merchandise of you by feigned words. Look into the legal dictionaries under fictio, which is fiction, which the Romans basically had to place a fictio title in order to have a jurisdiction to try someone through a court or to enforce something. So it was a lie. You really weren't a Roman citizen, but it was implied you were. And in that sense, in the brackets under Black's Law 10th, beside fictio, it says to feign. So very simply, your last name is there to feign what is real and truth. It's there to cover up truth with a lie. What is also defined fiction of in 1755? The thing feigned or invented. Men are not creators, they're inventors. It's just not what you think. A falsehood, a lie. So fiction is just a very fancy word for a lie. We could have said lie, but we'll say it as fiction, so it tames it down a bit, but it's still a lie. It's make-believe. Now, going back to the importance of James chapter 1:4, we have to understand that when we're involved in fiction, which is related to idolatry, and we're going to get to that in a section because we know that an idol is not real. So you can carve an idol. The natives did it with totem poles and bowed down to it and worshipped it, as people do with the Catholic Church, going in and bowing down to images and statues of Mary and Jesus. That's idolatry. There's no life in those carvings or those structures. So it is a false idol. It's not real. It's not God. It's taking away from worship from God. So when we go to the term idolater, which is the next clue, what is an idolater in reality? It's spoken of right through the New Testament or the New Covenant scriptures, and it's always warning. It says, guard yourselves from idols. But we take that so off the top as only meaning maybe those idols that you would see in these churches. But let's go to what idolater is in the dictionary and in the etymology. Idolater comes from hired servant, wages, see larceny. And larceny is theft. So could there be anything good connected to this at that point once you know that? So you understood that the hired servants were deceived into fraud, into fiction. They were made merchandise of. And it says that God hears their cries because they didn't know. They were deceived. And so he is going to bring remedy, but unfortunately they are held back by fraud. So therefore, you can understand that if the name that they bear, the legal surname they bear that's placed on them as a tag in these legal kingdoms or societies, is operating everything they do, all their labor, all their energies go into that, and they're placing it into a title that's not related to them in reality, and it can be maneuvered and have laws placed on it, and so therefore, really they don't have standing. That's why they put a notwithstanding clause in the charter. When things don't go in the way the government's operating it, they can just basically pull those rights away because they're not real, they're fictitious, and they're granted to them, and therefore it's a title that's not your real name. As we would stated before in the Canadian Gage Dictionary, surname is a name added to one's real name. So therefore it's not real, it's a fiction. It's make-believe, used in the world of make-believe money, pre-tender names for to issue legal tender. So when we go to Matthew 6:24, which is a very important scripture, now Matthew 6:24 lays out the rules from Christ's mouth. Matthew 6:24 says, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he'll hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Cannot is a word that means impossible. You can't play both sides. Why is it that scripture basically was translated there out of the Greek, used the term mammon? Because it was important to understand that Mammon was a god of the Greeks, of which they worshipped money. It was the money god for the Greeks. In the Roman Empire, they had a similar god called Juno. which basically even Canada has an awards ceremony for basically people making money in that industry, that music industry. So they call it the Juno Awards to honor the god Juno, the goddess Juno, in which the Romans coined their currency. So it's a false god. You cannot worship a true god and the false god, and to serve Mammon and to serve God cannot be. So therefore, you can try to do both, but it won't work out. So it's one or the other. It's not both as people think they are in modern day Christianity that's out there, because you'll find out from your pastor that he will tell you can do that because he's in the Mammon game. And therefore, he's not serving God. He thinks he is, but he is not. He is still serving Mammon. And you have to have people serving Mammon in order to bring the Mammon into your church. There's no other way it would work. So Matthew 6:24 clearly states it, so it's a false god. That's what it's representing there. He could have put money. Modern translations change that to money, but it is Mammon. It was put there for a reason, and basically we can either look at this, deny it all, say none of this connects, but we have to go to what the guys who basically own the debt of the company, according to Matthew Henry's commentary on Luke 11, Woe unto lawyers. He starts off, the lawyers own the debt of the company. So let's go to the Be Your Own Liar lawyer book that was distributed quite heavily, at least in Canada. Basically we're going to read under the definition of fraud. And what is the direction that someone would have to do in order to relieve themselves out of fraud. And we're going to take scripture all into account here, because you should be right now in a very stricken conscience position now once you've realized what this is. So we go to fraudulent contracts. Now remember, I'm going to fraudulent contracts because legal citizenship is contract law. It comes with duties, debts, and obligations. Uniquely, the state signs for those duties, debts, and obligations because they have someone else's signature on the very instrument that you carry. But then you go and take that instrument and you go get another instrument as a derivative of it to go participate and take over that responsibility of the state. So now in adverse possession, you now put your signature and picture because they're going to need to track you for what you're doing because you said you could do it better than they could. So therefore, you're taking over Caesar's responsibility on the Mammon. That's why render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God. Why are you putting your given name in with Caesar when Caesar only has the one name? That is his fiction, that's his responsibility, and therefore they sign even for the inducement that they did upon the party that was entering. They even take responsibility. That's why their subscription name is on the bottom. He who signs at the bottom is the subscriber, the one below the law. Unfortunately, inducement led us to take it over. So under fraudulent contracts, which would relate to legal citizenship, which also leads to a charter grant and a patent, which is what the birth certificate represents, not the statement of birth record. Can't use that for identification. They even tell you that. But the birth certificate instrument, that is different. So we go to fraudulent contracts, which would be you involved with being surety for that instrument. It says fraudulent contracts are voidable, not void. A definition cannot be given that would cover all the forms of fraud. Wow, that's a wake up and smell the coffee. Everything that's in there is fraud in reality, but if you're consenting to it, it's not fraud. Consent removes mistake. When you discover the mistake, it removes consent. So it goes, but the following will make sufficiently clear what would constitute fraud. A statement of facts that the party making the statement knows to be false. Well, the parents didn't really know that they were making a false statement when they filled out the statement of birth record. So they didn't know they were in fraud, okay? A statement of facts that are known to one and not readily discernible by the other, and yet such as should be revealed. Well, certainly, there wasn't too much revelation that was laid on when the parents were entering the private name of the child onto a legal secular document for registration implied to be a citizen, for that child in the future. So therefore, there was no real instructions telling them anything of what was really going on that. So therefore, it was not revealed. And in fact, a statement of birth record is a legal document that can be referred to, in some dictionaries have defined it as a joker. It's a joker document that it really means something contrary to what it is. So therefore, it's not a go-ahead to claim the title, it's a forbidden document. It's forbidding you to touch that title. You have no right to it, but if you want to go against it, you'll have to authorize, and then they issue the certificate based on first the authorization of the parents to get a birth certificate for the child, or eventually the child taking it over at age of election and then carrying on the heir. Okay, so we go further. It says, the misrepresentation must actually deceive in order to make a case of fraud. To sustain an action of deceit, there must be proof of fraud, and nothing short of it will suffice. Well, you've got all the proof in there, because the two records bring about the evidence of fiction. Okay, so it's there, it's on there. But we've taken it in the other direction with the consent to go ahead to become something that we're not, and enter into being a friend of the world, which makes you an enemy of God, according to James chapter 4. Next, we have to look at the definition of to deceive. Canadian Law Dictionary says to deceive, to induce someone to believe something which is false is true. Then we have the definition of legal fiction, the assumption in the law that something which is false is true. Take your time to look at this. You're going to see the connection for it all. It says, to sustain an action of deceit, there must be proof of fraud, and nothing short of that will suffice. Fraud is proved when it is known that a false representation has been made, either 1, knowingly, or 2, without belief in its truth, or 3, recklessly careless, whether it be true or false. Then it says, as stated above, a fraudulent contract is voidable but not void. The party who has been defrauded may void the contract if he wishes, or he may affirm it and compel the other party to perform it. If he wishes to void it, 2 things are necessary. Number 1, he must not accept any benefit derived from it or continue to act under it after he has discovered the fraud. 2, he must give prompt notice of the fraud after he has discovered it. The dishonest party cannot disaffirm the contract, but in all cases is bound to carry it out if the other party demands it. If both parties practice fraud, neither one can enforce the contract against the other. A promissory note obtained through fraud cannot be collected by the party who obtained it, but upon coming into the hands of a third party before maturity for value, and who did not know of the fraud, would be valid and good against the maker. So we have to really go slow on that, but you can now find these books, hopefully. I mean, they are available. The one I'm reading out of was out of 1897. I know that they published these right through the early 1900s, so you may not find all the exact details in every version, but I would believe that the definition of fraud would probably have stayed with the same definition. I read, of course, out of the 1611 King James Bible, and I've also read out of Samuel Johnson's dictionary of 1755, which is available. You can get the one that has the excerpts, not the whole dictionary. Online, they've started to put a full reproduction of this dictionary. And then I was reading out of a Webster's College edition of the American English language for the word idolater. So lots of research in this video, but we've also talked about procedure. The onus is upon the one who basically has discovered the fraud. You can't be whining about it and participating in it and think you can work on both sides. So it is going to require to forsake all, as Jesus said in Luke 14:33. So I hope this video has helped. And you can repeat this over and over again, which is great about the videos. So you don't have to worry about you came to one session and you're trying to remember what I've said.